Everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we get ready for our med school application workshop. I myself am Ron Reyes, one of the associate directors here at the Career Center, overseeing HealthBeat and supporting the pre-grad grad team. And I'll hand it over to Jade.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jade, and I am the Associate Director for Pre-Health Pre-Med and also oversee HealthBeat. So both of us are your go-to advisors for any sort of pre-health pre-med counseling.
With that, just a quick overview of what we'll be going over today. So we're going to touch on timeline leading up to application, as well as just general considerations for application timeline, application cycle components, looking at what are competitive, redefining what is competitive and understanding competencies, as well as breaking down kind of key components or a general framework in which you should be kind of documenting, preparing, and executing on the med school application process. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into it. So for the year leading to application, we try and encourage everybody to get a head start before the application is even open, thinking about 6 months to a year out. And primary reason being for a lot of students, having a little bit more ability or opportunity to prep ahead of time will make the process of applying easier. So for example, a general timeline that a lot of students might find helpful would be, for example, the summer before they plan to apply, they're studying for the MCAT. Theoretically, they might be taking the MCAT right before the fall quarter starts. Hopefully by then you have a pretty good reasoning on why you want to go into medical school. So around late to mid fall, we would think it would be a good idea to start figuring out what is it going to look like for a personal statement or main reasonings for applying to medical school as part of a kind of pre-drafting a lot of the work that you're going to be putting together. Around January, I'm hoping that most students have an idea of who their letter recommenders are. So if you pre-drafted your personal statement, you kind of know what are key experiences that you're going to be working on as most meaningful experience, which we'll go into detail later. Ideally, that also means that it's around a good time to be checking in with your letter writers or potential letter writers at the latest, right? Just to make sure that if they need any additional information or you want to confirm that they are going to move forward with writing you a letter, you have plenty of time to account before the actual May application open. So that's why we think about drafting meaningful experiences and starting to really engage with letter writers around early January, early February timeframe in preparation for the application cycle. Granted, ideally you have had maybe a couple of your letter writers already planned before that, but around this time frame is when we're really starting to think about it. So in preparation for the application and all those things that I just mentioned before, we usually want to break down the application cycle components. So you're going to have your quantitatives, which are very simply, your academic history and your MCAT scores. And then the qualitative or more qualitative components, which is actually the rest of the application. So during primary application, your qualitatives are really going to be your personal statement, your works and activities, your letters of recommendation. So those are all kind of your initial documentation that you are going to be submitting it during primaries. And then farther along in the application process, we're going to get into things like secondary essays, which are additional essays for all the different schools that you'll be applying to, as well as interview season. So as you can tell, there is going to be a large amount of qualitative data that is being collected by medical schools, both in your primary, secondary, and interview process before they come to a decision about the applicants that move forward with admittance. So kind of break that down as a timeline, this is just a basic timeline to think about what does the year of application look like, right? So assuming somebody decides to apply right at the beginning of the cycle, okay, the application opens usually the first days of May, great. If you've already pre-drafted maybe your personal statement and some of your experiences, it might be easier for you to then input everything relatively quickly so that hopefully at the latest, maybe you're submitting beginning of June at around that time frame would be great. Assuming that it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to verify, that means you'll hit your secondaries probably around July. Again, the later you submit your primaries, the later you might get verified and therefore start your secondaries. So just a pro tip about secondaries and timeline. Secondaries, for at least all the private schools you apply to, will immediately trigger them to ask, or when you get to verification status, I should say, that should trigger secondaries for all the private schools you're applying to. And then for the public institutions, they'll do a little bit more filtering before they decide to move forward with asking you to do secondaries. So that's just an important note, because say, for example, you have somebody applying to 25 schools, and let's just say 20 of them are private. That means right at verified status, whatever timeline it takes for you to get to verified, you're going to have to be ready to start working on, say, about 40 short essays for those 20 schools, and hopefully getting that done in a timely manner so that you're ready for them to get that information before interview season. That being said, interview season is usually September through February. Most interview seasons have a bulk of their interviews happening from September through November. We start to see it slow down December, January, and February, as admissions is going to have less room and space available to do later interviews and appointments for interviews the farther along in the interview season. In addition to that, another consideration is just being aware that these interviews can be virtual, but they can also be in person. So you want to plan accordingly during the interview season to be able to get up and go to the school that you're planning to interview for. Moving along, by March, typically from mid-March through April is when we get our acceptances and our wait lists. So for anybody that's been accepted around this time, you'll start to get notifications. Sometimes we see it a little bit earlier than that, but the majority of students will get it, mid-March through April. And for those on wait lists, you usually get notified around the same time. Now, decision day, April 30th, is where the AAMC tells everybody, if you've been accepted to at least one school, please lock it in. And the reason being is, say, for example, somebody gets accepted to 3 schools. They're only going to go to one of those institutions. So those other 2 spots have to go to somebody on wait list. And so we see people coming off wait list typically April and May during that time frame. So that's why the application cycle itself is a full year, May to May, and why we see, towards the end of your application cycle, you're only realistically getting maybe about 3 to 4 months at best to prepare, move, get your finances in order, and start medical school. So that's an overview of what the actual application cycle should look like. So a question that we get all the time is, how do you define a competitive applicant? So we kind of want to redefine it, not it as more than just metrics. And, as you can see from looking at the qualitative and quantitative components earlier, a smaller portion is just metrics. Qualitative components are a lot more nuanced and a lot more vast in what you are submitting, right? So what we're looking for, especially from an admissions perspective, is what about the application shows that you're ready? Does it highlight enough strengths of who you might become or where your direction is going to go? Are you a good fit for medical school? Who are you going to be as a future physician? How do you show up, and why? What is your reasoning for doing this, right? So those are all kind of ways that we try and figure out, okay, who's going to be a great student or a great physician in the future. So, being competitive is not really about being competitive against each other. It's being highly motivated, highly qualified, and justifying your reasoning why you want to do one of the most difficult processes, which is going through the med school application process, going through med school, going through residency, and then practice. So, to redefine competitive, it really is about a well-executed applicant who knows where they're going, is able to justify why they're doing this, and can really communicate who they are as a healthcare professional and a future physician. So, with that in mind, pro tip, the AAMC gives us what they look at. They give us the competencies that they're hoping to have, or at least see within their applicants, right? So everything that you are doing to submit for the application matters in one way, shape, or form, because they can utilize these competencies to kind of understand where is this showing up within the student's application. It's a holistic review, and holistic review means they're going to be looking at everything and finding every possible bit of information that is helpful for them to kind of understand you through this lens. So it's going to be a combination of, what you've done with your experience, as well as how you present that information over the period of time that you're submitting for the application. So some key components of the application. This is a little preview of what we'll be going over today. In further detail is a quick review of your academic record or planning around academics. We'll touch very briefly under resources and studying on MCAT. We'll be talking about your experiences, personal statement, and letters of recommendation. So these are all things that students hopefully are going to, if they haven't started already, are going to be keeping track of for purposes of applying, and hopefully saving all of this information in one place, so it's really effective for you to get a good gauge of how are you doing for purposes of application. For my people who are currently applying, this is pretty much everything that you're going to submit. So we want to make sure that you're aware of this as we go through the rest of the presentation. All right, Jade.
All right, everyone. So now we're moving into kind of an overview of the pre-health framework, or how you should really be organizing yourself, because organization is really key in applying, to medical school. So you'll want to create a place to save all the work you are doing for the application and organize different components. I would say in an Excel sheet, and we'll send you a couple links for some of these. So some components to keep in mind is your academics. And so an academic tracker can help with that. You'll definitely want to track your experiences as well, or journal. You want to keep a list of your professional contacts, possibly even the last time you contacted that person, just to stay organized, because you will need at least 4 letters of recommendation, 4 to 6, up to 10. So you'll want to really, it's a lot of managing up. You'll also want to keep organized, and this kind of goes hand in hand with your experience tracker, your personal statements, and your short essays. You'll want a school list. I actually have had students kind of have a list of maybe 25 schools is what we recommend, maybe up to 30. And they'll kind of color code their target, their reach, and their safety schools, very similar to how you did for undergrad, probably. And so some of them will color code, they'll target based on GPA, MCAT data, et cetera, mission statement, right? And then any resources, guides, and study materials, you definitely want to be familiar at this point with the AAMC website, where all of the reliable information will come from, including a lot of frequently asked questions for submitting your application. Next slide. Okay, so for tracking academics, let me go ahead and put something in the chat for you guys. This is a great way to list your courses, your grades. We had students in our class actually do this assignment. It's pretty helpful. The only difference is your quarter and semester units. So you'll just need to convert semester units times 1.5 equals quarter unit. So that's kind of the only difficult part about this, but otherwise it will actually give you your cumulative GPA, as well as your core GPA for your sciences. And so this is a great way to stay organized. You can also enter your MCAT registration date and everything like that. So this is just a really good place to start. A lot of students ask the question of, say if they were transfer students, do their community college coursework count? And yes, it does. Your UCSD GPA is one thing, and then your cumulative GPA is a whole nother thing, right? It's any college courses that you've taken since graduating high school, and sometimes while in high school, say if you were in a dual enrollment program. So it's really important to track this. Next slide. And then we have just your transcripts and your course classification. So just kind of some steps on submitting your transcript. You'll have physical transcripts that you can actually have mailed to you if ordered by 1:30 p.m. during business days. And then you'll want to give 2 to 3 weeks for mailed free paper transcripts. And then if you need them quicker or sooner than that, overnight costs extra. Digital transcripts are great as well. You can use the medical school's provided email or the AMCAS to submit those. And if you're not sure, just call registrar about those submitted documents. But yes, you will need transcripts both from, say, if you were taking courses at the community college, which a lot of people do, or even say at another institution, you need transcripts from all institutions. And so just kind of a quick course classification as well. You'll have your BCPM courses, which stands for biology, chemistry, biochem, physics, and math. And then you have your all other courses, which include basically all your other courses, right? And if you're curious about just the course classifications and kind of what that looks like, you can go to the AAMC website. So moving on to journaling experience and everything like that and kind of what to list. So you'll want to journal all your experiences. And if it's not a class, it counts. So some people have asked me, okay, what if I work at Starbucks? You know, does that count? And yes, it does. These are transferable skills such as managing a team, such as customer service, such as time management, etc. Right? So all of these experiences count. You have up to 15 experiences that you can enter onto the application, and we'll go a little bit more in depth on kind of what that looks like. But you'll want to organize all of your experience by the name of the activity or the experience / the project. You want to go ahead and list any groups or organizations, affiliations associated with that project. You want a point of contact and maybe like the contact information for that person. You'll want start and end times. So month and year is fine. You don't need to have the May 2nd, right? You can just have the month and the year is totally fine. You'll want hours accrued and completed. So I would say your total amount of hours, your hours per week, and how many weeks total. That will help you when you're submitting this information on the website. And then some relevant notes on your experience. So consider who you worked with, what you worked on, when was this, where was this, what was the purpose of this, any challenges faced. Also, when you're applying and when you're submitting these experiences and even considering your personal statement where you may actually talk about these experiences, you'll want to talk about maybe challenges faced. So I always like to say, they're looking at character development and distance traveled when they're looking at your experiences and your personal statement. And so I always kind of explain it as, say you're watching a movie. If there's very little character development or no challenges that were overcome, it's kind of a boring movie, right? Versus if you're thinking of your favorite movie and your favorite character, there's usually a lot of character development. And so it actually is kind of similar with just kind of your life, right? Because movies reflect real life. So, think about how you want to capture that information. You want to talk about any skills developed or lessons learned within that character development. And also just conversations, memories, experience. This all kind of contributes to that experience and that character development. So you're journaling for the purpose of obviously entering this information on the CAS website, as well as hopefully maybe thinking about how you want to include some of these in your personal statement. Next slide. I'm going to send you guys a quick template on organizing your experiences as we talked about. So the name of the experience, the organization. And so there's some really cool drop-down options, with the experience type, which actually matches the AAMC website. So even though the website has opened, so you definitely at this point, you can go in and enter it in the website. But at the same time, if you want, you can organize yourself first because you can't submit until June anyways. So feel free to use this. It's really helpful to just organize yourself. Next slide. Okay, so kind of going a little bit deeper into the experiences section, you have areas to enter all of the relevant information. As you can see with the screenshot here, you have your average weekly hours, your number of weeks, your total hours, which we talked about kind of breaking them down, right? You'll want to enter just the title, and if it was volunteer or compensated or anything like that. So for something like this, you have up to 15 different experiences that you can enter, and they'll all look like the screenshot here. And so your experience description will be about 700 characters. And going back to the most meaningful, as I touched on before, you'll have three most meaningful experiences, and they give you over 1,300 characters to actually explain this meaningful experience. So when you're documenting your experiences, you really want to think about which ones were most meaningful for you. Um, and then, just kind of on the same token, we have AAMCAS, which is the osteopathic medicine or DO route. So a lot of people, they'll actually apply through AMCAS and they'll apply through AAMCAS. And so they'll say submit for 25 MD schools and maybe 5 DO schools, for example. So that's up to you how you want to do that. But for AAMCAS, you actually have unlimited experiences, activities, and awards. You'll want general info. So just the name, hours. We don't have a screenshot, but it's very similar. You'll have an experience description of 600 characters. And then you're highlighted, so your most meaningful don't get an additional word count. So just definitely consider that. And then you have mini essays for extenuating circumstances, such as COVID, such as illnesses, such as deaths, unfortunate deaths in the family, and things like that. So this is just kind of a screenshot of what that would look like. Next slide. So a little bit more about most meaningful experience. So AMCAS gives you the opportunity to select those ones that impacted you the most. And basically, when you're thinking about your most meaningful, you want to ask yourself the questions as what was the most meaningful to your growth as a person? Which experiences did you have strong mentors for? And just a quick tip, if you have someone that you're mentioning, say in your most meaningful experiences and or your personal statement, it'd be good to get a letter of recommendation from that person if you're going to mention, say, a doctor that you shadowed or mentor that was particularly impactful for you or to you, so they can kind of see the other side of how that mentor or that physician kind of saw your growth. And what it does is it basically helps to make a stronger case for you as an applicant when someone co-signs what you're saying about yourself. You can also think about which experiences did you learn the most from or gain the most insight? Were they transformative, and how have they impacted you? So definitely just while you're here in the presentation, you can definitely be taking notes and thinking about those experiences that you may want to list for that. And then, so show, don't tell. So when you're entering experiences, and this actually is very similar for your personal statement, when you're writing, you want to show how you grew or any skills that you learned. So just an example, a telling example would be, I use my communication skills, empathy, and compassion, et cetera, et cetera. Versus showing would be bringing patients extra blankets and remembering what they cared about most made all the difference. So you're actually writing about not just the skills that you learned, but what you did to learn those skills. And I hope that makes sense. Another example of telling would be, I saw many patients and their families from different backgrounds. Showing would be working with over 100 families over 2 years within blank community, consisting with common challenges of XYZ. Right? So you're being more specific, you're actually quantifying some information, right? How many hours maybe you worked at something is a good way of quantifying something. So yeah, these are just some examples of when you're typing your experiences, make sure you're being very specific. And I'll hand it back off to Ron.
All right, so moving on to a little bit that link that we sent out earlier with the experiential tracker is helpful in that if you look at these third tab, basically the next tab over, you can actually keep track of the people that you are following up with, developing professional recommendations from, and making sure that you don't lose sight of, okay, when do I need to follow up with these letter writers? Should I be updating them on things that have recently occurred that might change what they're able to talk about? Additionally, there's a comment in chat about, if I'm going to be applying a couple years out, can I use older letters? The answer for older letters is you can theoretically use them if they are good letters. However, I would always say, is it possible to reach back out to that letter writer before you're submitting referencing hopefully some of the history and information and relationship that you've built up to see if it would be helpful for them if you updated them on where you're at currently and if they can submit an updated letter. So even though you can use an older letter and that's fine, it can strengthen your application if they're willing to take additional time to hear out what are the differences now and update the letters that you have. And so in order to help you stay on top of that, we just want to remind students that you can use, in the experience tracker, the third tab to kind of keep track of these professional contacts that you have. So 4 considerations for letter writers. A lot of times we get a lot of questions on how do I start pursuing those, or what is some methodologies or ways to do that. So I'm just going to walk you through some steps. The first is start off with trying to find a good way to meet them, whether it is in person, during office hours. See if they are open to setting up a time to talk with you. And I usually feel in person is a lot better because they are more captive to you when you're in front of them. Once you do set up that time, be prepared to let them know what you are doing, right? And and why you're interested in talking with them about what you're doing. So usually I like to think a bit about saying, I am currently looking at applying into medical school, and I really appreciated working with you, in whatever circumstance that you are going to say, right? And then ask them, if they are going to be open to writing a letter. And if they are, you want to also be mindful that you give them more time than less time. Hopefully we're not hearing people just now asking somebody to write a letter for an application that is open. That would be tough, right? But if you've had these conversations at least a few months before, that's all right. 6 months for a lot of faculty is ideal. It just depends on, again, the context of the relationship. And then as far as when you're asking them, it's always good to be respectful and thankful for them taking the additional time. Even if they aren't 100% down to write the letter, you still want to appreciate them for hearing you out, because you never know, they may be able to make a recommendation for something else or refer you to somebody who might be able to help you better. So to kind of recap, how do we ask? You introduce yourself. You talk about the context in which you know this person. You give them the reasoning why you're having this conversation, right? I am a medical student or pre-med student applying. Ask key phrase, are you open to writing a letter or assisting me in whatever, right? The word open is great because it leaves the opportunity for the word maybe, right? I'm not ready yet, but maybe I can help you out. Great, I can work with that. Then make it hard for them to say no by providing them any additional context that could help make it easier for them to help you. So for example, if there's some reservations, you can say, I really want to make this, an easy thing for you to do if you're open to it. If you need any resources, a history of what I've done, list of my experiences, personal statement, I'd be more than happy to provide that or talk to you further about those things through the process, right? Give them resources to make it easy for them to say yes to writing you a letter. So those are just some quick tips on the process, and usually we can workshop that with students on one-on-ones as well. As far as once you're ready to submit these letters, AMCAS gives you really a few different things to keep in mind. So for UCSD students, you guys typically are going to just submit individual letters. Very rarely are the UC system going to have any sort of committee or letter packets. You will see that verbiage on the application. Those are really for specialized programs in which a committee letter might be available. So we sometimes see this in like maybe a special master's or maybe a post-bac program where they have a dedicated committee letter or a packet of recommendation letters that they are providing. Outside of that context, though, for the majority of students, you're just submitting individual letters to the AAMC. Like Jade had mentioned, we usually recommend about 4 to 6 letters. The AAMC has minimums of 3, max of 10, and you want to have a combination of strong letters. So it could be science professors, non-science professors, potentially a researcher, and then anybody who is either supervised, managed, or worked with you. Ideally, if you don't have healthcare experience where they've either supervised, managed, or worked alongside you. Maybe you also can consider getting a letter from, say, for example, a healthcare professional who you've shadowed, right? But these are different types of letters that we think about. You don't need every single one of them, but you want a healthy combination to kind of cover both academics and experience. And then I saw there, is it wise to get some letters from more than one, from more than one organization, if they're different roles and different capacities and experience, possibly. So, all right. So as far as additional advice, please start working early on getting letters if possible. You want to be aspirational, right? These are the future things I want to do. Here's what I want to go towards. Is that something that you could be open to, right? Like if I asked that at the beginning of maybe the first class with this really cool instructor and they say, great, usually I write letters for people who are taking 2 classes from me. If you've asked early, you have the potential capacity to decide to do that, right? And then ideally, a good letter writer is going to be one who is either enthusiastic or excited to talk with you further about the process. And then it's good, like using the tracker that I mentioned, to have a way of checking in with them somewhat regularly during the process to make sure that you stay on top of making sure the letters are ready to go once the time comes. So just a quick check-in is fine more often than not. And a lot of times letter writers will tell you when it's good to check in with them and how they prefer to be contacted and what their timelines are. So once you are ready to submit, a couple things, the AAMC will say, okay, you have Interfolio. You can also submit the request through the letter writer application in AMCAS, or the recommendation section in AMCAS, or they can mail it. Mailing it is not recommended. That is old school. They still allow it, but we do not recommend it because there's a lot more possibility that a letter might be delayed, lost, or take longer to get uploaded. So the 2 primary ones most students nowadays do is either the third-party website called Interfolio, which can store letters separately. It's kind of like its own secure vault, so to speak, digitally, that it'll hold on to the letters. And then once the application opens, students can forward those letters from Interfolio into AMCAS. Otherwise, if you are in the application cycle when you are submitting the requests for letters, filling out all the information on who your letter writer is, along with contact information, will trigger the AMCAS to send out a request with appropriate documents to ask the letter writer to upload their letter of recommendation. So ideally, I saw a question about when should letters come in. As soon as possible once you've started the application. I always say a good rule of thumb is the latest I would hope a letter comes in is around the time of secondaries. And that's because, say, for example, somebody's about to submit their secondaries for a private institution. At that point, it's up to that institution to double check everything that you have and see if they want to move forward reviewing your application if you're missing anything, right? If you're missing an MCAT or if you're missing your letters of recommendation, they may decide to not start reviewing you, right? That's up to the school's prerogative. So usually you want your letters in before secondaries around the same time that you're submitting the primary application. All right, so for Interfolio, some quick notes about Interfolio. Since it's a third party, both Interfolio and AMCAS have instructions on transcript submission. Fortunately, with Interfolio, you can create an initial account just to see what it is, but it is a subscription service to hold on to letters, right? So that's the thing that I remind everybody. It is an additional cost, and usually it's a yearly cost. I don't know the cost off the top of my head. It's not a huge amount, but it is something that you want to be aware of if you are, say, somebody who's collecting letters early because the instructor would prefer to submit the letter to you and it's not even application season yet for you, right? So Interfolio is kind of your backup to do that if you're not going to be requesting it directly from the instructor during AMCAS application system. And then a couple notes of that. Once the letters are all uploaded into Interfolio, and you are ready to forward them, you'll forward them to the AMCAS application. AMCAS will update your application with those letters from Interfolio, and much like the letters that are coming in directly from AMCAS, once you are ready to designate where those letters are going, you will select the schools that are receiving which letter. So it'll populate, you'll make sure the information is correct, and then you can select, okay, this letter is going to this list of schools, this letter is going to this list of schools, and you can do that for the entire application system. All right. A quick note about the AMCAS letter writing application system. When you are utilizing it, make sure to know all the information that you're going to keep on hand. There is also going to be a document that the letter writer can get that you can download, which will have a reminder of the steps with your ID and everything else as kind of a backup walkthrough for the letter writer. One of the things I tell everybody, because I used to actually have to upload letters of recommendation for a department, is that always, always, always follow up with your letter writers. Once you have a request, whether through Interfolio or AMCAS, getting sent to them, make sure to follow up with your letter writers so that they know what to look for and that they don't miss it going to bulk or spam, and that they have any additional information to link your information to the letter that they are uploading. So they have detailed instructions on both of the websites, but I like to put that as a friendly reminder since I used to have to upload a ton of these letters all the time. It's just very helpful if all the information is easily accessible.
So before we move on to the next session, let's just answer a couple of questions about letter writers. So the first one is, why is an address required for the letter writers?
So it's not necessarily like usually you want to use your work address, or like if it's a university, you use that. It's just so that they have an idea where this is coming from, right? When you fill out the AMCAS application, there is a little agreement that yes, to the best of my ability, I am being truthful about all the information here. And if they need to do any background check, it should be easy for them to confirm that you are being truthful. More often than not, they're not going to necessarily need that information, but on the off chance they need to vet something, as much information you can provide is very helpful. Also, there are some elements of the application where they used to receive a physical request back in the day with that information. Nowadays it's digital, but having a physical address is always helpful, just in case we're talking about the very old school method of receiving all the documents through a physical address. So that's the primary reason they still have that kind of information.
You could follow up with the letter writer to see which address that they want to use. I mean, it might feel awkward, but I mean, realistically, if this person you've built enough rapport with this person enough for them to write you a letter, then it should be okay to ask for their address, and they'll understand, because it's not that you want to know their address, it's that their address is required for the application.
Right.
So it's not really that odd. And then the other question was, should you send different letters to different schools or send all letters to all schools?
That one, I would say ideally, it's partially dependent on if the school has a limit on how many letters they'll read. Like one school in California reads only 4, another school only reads up to 6 or up to 5. Other schools, they can have all of them and they're fine. So it's really more dictated by the schools you're applying to than just kind of carte blanche sending them all. So like, for example, the schools that maybe only take 4, if you have 5 letters, pick the 4 letters that you feel the strongest about based off of what that school prefers, right? But it should always be dictated by what the schools list as, if they have a limit or not. And then you want to adjust accordingly based off of how they post it on either the MSAR or their admissions website.
And then the last question, and then if there are any other questions, we'll save that for Q&A. But the last question is, do letter writers submit through Interfolio, or does a student submit through Interfolio?
The letter writer should always be the one directly uploading into Interfolio for the sake of following through the process. Yeah.
And then I believe, so Interfolio is linked to the CAS. and then you're able to like somehow link your Interfolio account to your CAS to have the letters sent to the schools.
They have a walkthrough of how your letters are going to get sent over to the CAS application or AMCAS application system. Yes, they're not directly linked because it's a third party, but usually what happens is you make your account, you get all the letters put together or collected, whatever letters are necessary to be collected through Interfolio. And then once you are ready to submit all of those letters, when you're logged into Interfolio, it'll let you know that your letters have been uploaded. You can't read them, but you know that they are there and ready to go. And then you'll be given options to go ahead and forward it over to AMCAS. Their Interfolio has been around for a long time, so they're pretty used to having students use it as a letter storage system.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get into kind of the last couple sections, which are personal statements, secondary essays, and just your overall narrative. And just kind of a quick note, we will be ending around 1:30. However, we'll stay for about 15 minutes after or however long it takes to answer some more of your questions. We'll try our best to get to the questions in the chat, but if there's anything that we haven't gotten to, if you can stay later, we'll answer it for Q&A after 1:30. Okay, so for personal statements and secondary essays, you'll want to brainstorm what the key moments or times that you've had to really help inform you on your decision to pursue medicine. And so really sit and think about those times. Some students will talk about, their childhood with maybe family members who were in the medical system or themselves, or maybe it was something more recent, right? Your experience maybe in high school or throughout your time in undergrad. That really helped inform you of your decision to pursue medicine, or maybe it's a combination of all the above. You'll want to think about what about medicine fascinates or motivates you, and what is important to you about the field, whether that be innovation, or whether that be patient care, or equity, diversity, inclusion. So you really want to think about all of these aspects. I think a big one too is why medicine over any other field, because I get a lot of students that say, I just want to help people. And it's just not a compelling enough reason to pursue medicine specifically, because you can help people in many other fields. So really think about why this field specifically over other fields. And then do you have experiences that illustrate the differences? So for example, if you're going into medicine, maybe you had experiences in PT as like a PT aide, or maybe as a pharmacy technician, or maybe in some other form of healthcare, which can kind of show I've had this experience in different areas, but really medicine is where it's at for me. So what this does is it helps to solidify to the admissions committee that you've really given this thought, and that if they admit you into medical school, you are more likely to actually make it through and finish to become a physician. So moving on to finding your narrative or your why. We talk a lot about this. And so what is your why? Purdue Writing Lab says, when writing a narrative essay, one might think of it as telling a story. These essays are often anecdotal, experiential, and personal, allowing students to express themselves in creative and quite often moving ways. I think the best personal statements are more of a narrative than simply a recalling of your meaningful experiences. So really think about how you want to write a narrative versus just kind of recapping any experiences that you had. So next slide, finding your why. What compels you to pursue this career, which we kind of talked about. Does your why speak to your personal growth? Did you overcome any hardships or challenges? And then, is this a realization of your actual values? And so when you're thinking about your why, it's okay, how much did I grow as a person? And growing as a person, how does that help me pursue my ultimate goal? Usually your why is a culmination of kind of your personal values as well, whether that's working with a certain population or having kind of an overall goal for your life, right? Because if you have a why, that actually helps you to kind of stand out more than I would say other applicants who maybe just kind of recount all of their experiences and don't have a solidified theme on their application. So to get to this point, you'll want to brainstorm and summarize into short paragraphs, and you might not use everything. So it's easier to get everything out on the paper and then kind of trim the edges or trim the fat, so to speak. You want to consider those important moments in your life. I would say to start, organize chronologically by time, and later on, if it makes more sense to kind of reorganize non-chronologically, that's fine as well. But you really want to see what pieces work together. So really get all of this out on paper to start. And then, 5,300 characters for your personal statement is not very long. It's not a lot. So you have to be concise in what you want to put on these essays. So when medical schools are reviewing you, they actually, and this was actually from Dr. Galuma, the Dean of Admissions of UCSD School of Medicine. He came and spoke with some of our students not long ago, a few weeks ago, and he discussed the different archetypes. So medical schools will try to figure out who you are and what you bring to the profession. And so they'll kind of see, okay, is this person more of a servant leader? Are they more of an innovator, or are they more of a healer? And most applicants will kind of fit into these three themes or areas, and sometimes an overlap maybe between one or two or more of them. And so this can kind of come into this can be informed by what kind of path you're pursuing, what is being conveyed on your personal statement, what experiences brought you to this point. And so by explaining, your experiences and having a really great narrative, they're able to again put a theme on who you are. I think because people, these letter writers are reading hundreds of applications each. It's easy to remember someone who has a theme. So I use this one all the time. But I had a student who was in her personal statement, in her narrative, talked about her want to become a surgeon. And they actually used different experiences that were seemingly not related, but they talked about, working with plants and kind of tending to very fragile specimens, and then working in the lab and kind of tending to other types of fragile biological specimens, and then having a love for music and piano and really connecting with the keys and the finger movements and things like that. And they were able to kind of culminate all of this into manual dexterity, and they kind of built on those skills by working with patients and gaining more experience, and really came to the conclusion that they would, along with their empathy and along with their manual dexterity, they believe that they would make a good surgeon. And there's more to the story, but I mean, out of the dozens of essays that I read, that's one that sticks out to me the most because it gave me a theme and it was very easy to remember. So psychologically, you want to give people something that they can remember about you, a theme. Next slide. Personal statements ultimately will show your motivation for the profession, your values, and how they fit into your career, your capacity to thrive. So you may not be at, obviously where you want to be in the field of medicine, right? Because you're only an undergrad and hopefully possibly a medical student, but do you have capacity to thrive based on how much you've grown in the past? So you want to show how much you're able to kind of develop as a person, and then also your vision for the future. So moving on, we have about 7 minutes here, so the last few slides. What are secondaries? So secondaries are your chance to ask yourself, how do I align with medical school? Okay, so it's important to think about the essays that you will be submitting to the medical school. Generally, they are very specific to that institution and their mission statement. And also, it's a chance. So for example, UCSD will actually have you write an autobiographical statement. I can never say that word, but I think I said it right this time. An autobiographical statement where you kind of have more of an autobiography. You write an autobiography of maybe even different experiences that you didn't have a chance to include in your personal statement. And some other schools may also have you do that as well, or really questions that are very specific to that institution. So next slide. secondaries will be either automatic or screened. So automatic means every applicant will get a secondary, and this is typically true for most private schools. And then there's also, on the other hand, screened secondaries. So applicants will have had to pass an initial screening after submitting their personal statements, their letters of recommendation, their MCAT scores, GPA, so basically everything on the application. And then if they screen that, okay, we want to invite this person to submit secondaries, they'll send you the secondary to submit. And this is true for most state schools and all UC schools. So be realistic when you're filling out your secondaries, complete them within 2 weeks, and pre-write is if possible, because some schools actually will list their secondary information early, so you can kind of get started on that. We'll put the link in the chat for what we have on the screen as well. So definitely consider that. So bringing it all together, you want to think about what defines you as an applicant, and your X factor is really a culmination of who you are and your unique perspective on your experience. So kind of to recap, you want to consider what you're proud of, what experiences inform who you are, what makes you unique, what are the themes or the trends in your narrative, what comes naturally to you. Ask mentors, friends, and families, what do they recognize about you? So these are just all ways to make yourself stand out, have a theme. Like I said, the ones that stand out the most are the ones that are really able to put in their narrative who they are and why they're pursuing medicine. Next slide. Okay, so selecting schools, you'll want to use the MSAR or the medical schools admission, the medical school admission requirements, sorry, my acronyms, they're getting mixed up. So you want to use the MSAR and the AAMC. And then the areas that you should be tracking are, the school name, so the type of school that you want to apply to, whether it's MD or DO, private or public institutions, maybe if there's a state that it's located in, GPA ranges. So for GPA and MCAT ranges, target schools, I would say you would be in the median, so like the 50th percentile. Safety schools, you'd be probably like the 75th percentile. And then safety schools, say if you're in the lower 25th percentile or even 10th percentile for that school's averages. And so that's just kind of a way to target for, to help your chances and, where you're getting in. You want to think about the cohort size. More like smaller cohorts you'll have more individualized experiences with smaller cohort size versus larger cohort size. It'll kind of be honestly the opposite in some cases. Metrics or demographics that reflect you. Maybe it's your gender, maybe it's your ethnicity, right? They have all of this data on the MSAR, and you do have to pay for this. It's $28 a year, I believe. And so what I tell students is just pay for it for your application kind of cycle. So you have all of this information at your disposal. And then any additional notes on the mission, culture, and then what the program has historically known for. So for example, if you're applying, we'll say to Kaiser School of Medicine, right? They want applicants who have community service, right? Because in their mission statement, it talks about valuing community service. If you apply to UC Riverside, for example, you want to really be sure that you want to stay in the Inland Empire, because in their mission statement, it talks about developing physicians who want to serve in the community of the Inland Empire, right? So these are things that you want to think about. Some of these specifics to the mission statement may also be on their secondary. So just make a note when you're taking stock of the schools that you also not only put their GPA rate, their median GPA, MCAT, et cetera, write down their mission statements as well. And maybe even secondary questions that they'll be submitting or that you'll be submitting. Some additional factors, some considerations, automatic versus screen secondaries. How many can you realistically complete within 2 weeks? I think Ron kind of said earlier, there may be 2 questions each for 20 or 25 schools. So that's 40 to 50 secondaries or short essays. So really think about, how you're going to manage your time. You want to think about how much it costs for, with financial burden. So there are programs where you can apply, I believe, to 15 schools for free, depending on your income, but you'd have to actually apply for that program through AMCAS. You want to think about just the application cost. So it's $175 for the first school and then $45 for each additional school. And the secondaries do cost money as well. It's about $100 per school. And then you want to factor in the MCAT, which is around $320. And then you want to think about how much you would need to pay if you need to reschedule. And then other assessments such as Casper or tests such as Casper. So just really take stock of how, which schools you're applying to, what's the cost of this. You really just want to keep yourself organized. Next slide. So gathering resources and study materials, everything should be downloaded from AAMC. I also have had students who use Kaplan or their classes. I have students that use Blueprint. I have students that use decks such as Mal Down Deck on Anki. I've had students that use, I forgot the other one. There's one more. There's one more that I'm forgetting, but I've had students use different resources to help them study. So I think, really think about using multiple free or sample MCAT materials to see what works best for you, because everyone has a different learning style. And so like when I work with a student, I'll recommend certain things, but it's just really going to depend on your learning style. Okay. Additional factors.
Oh wait, we did that one already.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah. Okay. So our final slide, some final tips. Make sure you are ready and you're competitive. You definitely want to try and apply one time. I think Ron mentioned this, just because just the sanity of applying more than once, it's just hard, right? And also it can be more difficult for you to get in the second time around because the schools are going to be comparing your first application to your second application. And if you didn't grow enough, it could actually work against you. If you're going to apply early. So I would say in June. If you're not ready, take a gap year, do not reapply. Applications do take time, so start early and ensure everything is accurate. So I would say start collecting letters, I would say in January, work on your MCAT around then as well. Start gathering all your information. I would say even, when you're, getting your experiences, keep stock of that, right? So start early, I would say 6 months in advance, know your schools and pre-write your secondaries if you can. Continue gaining more experience once you submit, because when you interview, they probably will talk to you about what have you been doing since graduating, right? So you want to be, you want to kind of show that you are dedicated and that you didn't just kind of not do anything during your gap year. And then release your application information so we can see how students are doing in your AMCAS. It just helps us be more informed on who's being successful. And when we're working with other students, we can say, hey, most of the students that we work with, for example, had this GPA or this MCAT score or whatever, right? So it helps us be better advisors. And so with that, there are additional free resources. We'll get these slides out to you. And I'm sorry for rushing for the last few slides, but we definitely want to get to Q&A if you guys have any questions. I already talked about one of the cons of reapplication. Number one is, and I'll go ahead and stop recording. So if you want to ask more questions, you definitely can.